What makes a country poor? Is it the country's geography, lack of resources, the corruption, or as some questionable sources on YouTube even claim, the low average IQ of the country? Well, it's a lot more complex than that, and in this video I'll explain exactly this, so hopefully you'll have a better understanding by the end of it. This is the Democratic Republic of Congo, the poster child for extreme poverty worldwide. Congo frequently ranks among some of the world's poorest countries, despite a large abundance of natural resources. One of the key factors leading to this is the lack of stability. You see, poor countries need to have stable governments to attract investment and also to allow its businesses and workers to partake in economic transactions. If you did decide to invest in Congo, however, you can kiss your money goodbye because the chances of you seeing it again are basically nil. Congo also has ongoing conflicts between militias and the government. Warlords frequently fight over resources and use slave labor to extract these resources and sell them to foreign entities for a profit. Without a stable government and the rule of law, the resources are nothing but a curse. But of course, stability doesn't guarantee rapid growth. Geography also plays a major part. In fact, here's a statistic. Out of 49 landlocked nations in the world, 32 are considered developing, a staggering 65%. The reason is simple. They don't have access to the oceans, the primary medium of trade in our heavily globalized world. Landlocked nations that do secure trade routes often need to negotiate with their neighbors, and unfortunately not all neighbors are friendly enough to allow stable trade routes. The geographical positioning of a country is also crucial, since countries around the equator need to deal with issues such as disease, which reduces the overall health of the workforce and therefore their productivity. And extremely mountainous countries also need to deal with the increased cost of building infrastructure, which means that they basically can't afford to build as much. On the opposite side of the spectrum, being in a location where world trade passes through can often help in integrating with world markets. While geography can be a major reason for poverty, there are still many successful landlocked nations such as Switzerland and even Rwanda and Ethiopia, which are both rapidly growing economies. However, these countries have laws and regulations which simply allows them to outcompete other countries in their locality and position themselves as an economic haven in their respective parts of the world. Speaking of laws and regulations, let's talk about institutions. Institutions are everything which help a society to function, from schools, hospitals to universities and banks. Many institutions need to be given the freedom to run autonomously from the government and need to be efficient in their function in order to maximize productivity of the workers. If there has been very little investment into schools or hospitals, for example, then the workforce will be less effective and will most likely be outcompeted by a foreign country and experience a lack of jobs. Similarly, if banks were corrupt, bureaucratic and inefficient, they are likely to charge a higher cost of credit to companies and the public. And of course, a lot of national wealth will end up in a bank account in Switzerland. It is just a fact that high-quality, effective institutions are crucial for a country to become rich. Unfortunately, many poor countries don't even collect the necessary funds to invest in institutions due to an ill-functioning tax system, another institution. Of course, there are countries such as Russia which suffer from extreme corruption and are still relatively wealthy. But the fact is that they have relatively well-functioning institutions, as many of their foundations have been laid years ago, and they've learned from the best in Europe and applied those practices to their own. Unfortunately for the Congo, well, they have to start from scratch because they don't really have any neighbors to learn from. Economies are built on business, but sadly very few heads of states actually realize this and instead pass laws which may be populous but very poor for business. This is actually very interesting and can often relate back to a country's culture. Countries which have very socialist norms in society often struggle to pass any pro-business reforms, as it will probably lead to political backlash and unrest. Latin America is a prime example of this, where oil workers in Hugo Chavez's Venezuela protested when there were set realistic quotas to meet. Unfortunately, poorer countries are also where it is more likely that the population will support socialism, since the economic effects of socialist policies are often quicker to take effect, but very short-lived. Whereas capitalist pro-business policy requires long-term planning, and most of the reforms take years to take effect. What is needed then is a powerful, educated leader to push pro-business reforms, which is what has happened in Rwanda, for example, where Paul Kagame has managed to lift his nation to rank 38 in the 2019 Ease of Doing Business survey, which means Mauritius and Rwanda are the most economically free nations in Africa. While it's hard to escape poverty, it's definitely not impossible, and it has been done before. This is South Korea. In the 1950s, they were as poor as Congo, but through immense focus on education and very pro-business policies which gave large, family-owned corporations huge benefits and incentives to expand, they created the jobs and incomes required to escape poverty for good. This doesn't mean every country should replicate South Korea's model. It mainly worked because of how small South Korea is and how centralized everything is. So it wouldn't work in a massive diverse country like India, which has its own model, which I'll touch on in a future video. But my point is that each country needs to figure out what works for itself and then implement those policies with an iron fist if it is to escape poverty. I'll touch more on South Korea in a future video, but for now, thanks for watching and subscribe to Econotechnic for more economics and technology based content.